from a defabricated garden shed in Rockland County, New York, USA. This is Stand Up with Pete Dominick. On today's episode, how to keep up with the latest Kylie Jenner-inspired fashion trends without losing your last bit of dignity. And now, the podcast host who sets fashion trends all by himself with his new line of Crocs and Big Hat, Pete Dominick.
Thank you very much, Pete Cohen. Thank you for pressing play, for tuning in, for downloading, subscribing, and listening to this year's show, where each and every weekday I'll be talking to expert guests about important issues that impact your life, your family, your community, your country, your planet, and your personality. Impact your personality. I'm not even sure that makes sense. I also just found out who Kylie Jenner was. Wasn't quite sure who she was. Very, very famous woman. Of course, for all the wrong reasons here in America. She wore a lion head, a fake lion head on her dress at a fashion show in Paris. I guess that's what Pico was talking about. If you're trying to keep up with the kiddos, well, consider yourself all caught up. Great conversation today with Barry Ritholtz, who is a finance expert, a money guy, and always a great guy to talk to about just about anything. We caught up and had an almost hour-long conversation that I'm excited to share with you on today's podcast. He is my only guest today, but let's be honest, he's hard to follow. Barry Ritholtz joins me today. I hope that you are okay. Hope you're hanging in there, doing all right. I am really excited about a whole bunch of things. I'm really inspired right now with the podcast. I was getting burnt out at the end of the year. I was doing a lot of work, and it just felt like the sun was going down a little bit. I don't know if it was that time of the year, if I just had been working too much. I'm not sure, but I feel super inspired and rested, and I'm really enjoying working with somebody else, my intern Odessa, who's got me straightened out on Instagram. She taught me how to use Instagram, so go follow me on Instagram right now, and I'll be posting more stuff up there. But if you're on Instagram, why aren't you following me? WTF? Hook it up, Pete Dominick. Come on. But there's a whole lot of other reasons, too, I don't want to really bore you with. But feeling really good, working my daily practice, being as healthy as I can mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, talking to a lot of friends, getting outside, exercising, eating pretty good. So checking a lot of boxes, and that is a good feeling. And I like to think it's affecting the podcast positively, too. So there you go. And now with all that good stuff being said, let's get to the news, which is frustrating, to say the least, and absolutely horrific, to say the worst. Because late last night, there was yet another horrific shooting again in the state of California. As of 10 p.m. on Monday night, 7 people were shot and killed at 2 separate scenes in Half Moon Bay on Monday afternoon, according to the San Mateo County Sheriff's Office. And that's just where I was when I was in California visiting the San Francisco boys, as I call them, Dustin, Pete, Jim Popowski, and Joby. Jim lives in San Mateo, and so I checked in with all of them last night. Make sure everybody is okay. The suspect, a 67-year-old resident, taken into custody at about 4:40 in the afternoon California time. He's found in his vehicle in the parking lot, and just absolutely horrific. I saw this tweet from the governor there, Gavin Newsom. He tweeted, "At the hospital, meeting with victims of mass shooting when I get pulled away to be briefed about another shooting, this time in Half Moon Bay. Tragedy upon tragedy. 2 horrific shootings in California in 2 days. Only in America. We are a gun-sick nation, that is for sure. And it's not changing anytime soon, but we cannot become numb to it. Keep supporting each other in every way that we can. And that is one way to remedy this horror show of a society it seems that we often are living in. I mean, there's no remedy. There are adaptations and coping mechanisms. I just say, find your people. Just keep finding your people, adding to your people. That's certainly been the best thing for me about this podcast, is building new relationships, new friends pretty much every day. I absolutely love it. Can't do it without you, so thank you very, very much. All right, well, what else did I want to mention? The other big news yesterday before, of course, that second horrible shooting, big news according to me at least, something I paid a lot of attention yesterday, was with, and I paid And I've been paying a lot of attention to this story out of Florida, where Ron DeSantis, the governor and Archie Bunker impersonator, is wasting no time with his attacks on black folks. Yesterday, he specifically targeted black queer people. He said that the AP, the Advanced Placement course in Black History, included a lesson about queer theory, and who could possibly want to know anything about that in an advanced placement class? We're talking about like seniors in high school. So yesterday, DeSantis had a news conference, and he's asked this question by a reporter. He had a lot to say, and he had a few questions. Hopefully you can hear the reporter. Here's off mic, but I think it's important. Here it is. And I'll give you some good thoughts and reaction on the other side.
Governor, on the AP African American Studies course that was rejected by the state, and a lot of criticism of that move, people saying, this is exactly what we were fearing with the individual freedom bill. I don't know if you or the commissioner could maybe expand a little bit more about.
Sure. I mean, I think so. As you know, in the state of Florida, our education standards not only don't prevent, but they require teaching Black history, all the important things. That's part of our core curriculum.
Name some of the important things. Let's go into depth on some of the important things about African American history that students learn, Governor.
This was a separate course on top of that for advanced placement credit. And the issue is we have guidelines and standards in Florida. We want education, not indoctrination. If you fall on the side of indoctrination, we're going to decline. If it's education, then we will do.
First of all, somebody needs to teach you how to speak, then we will do. Indoctrination. I mean, that is such an overused, powerful word by Republican politicians, especially in reference to public education. It's constantly referred to as indoctrination because they don't like anything that's not Christian nationalism.
This course, so when I heard it didn't meet the standards, I figured, yeah, they may be doing serious. It's way more than that. This course on Black history, what's one of the lessons about? Queer theory.
Oh, wait a second. I didn't know there was a lesson on queer theory. Now I actually agree with Governor DeSantis. This should not have been. I can't even believe they were. Why on earth would they do that?
Now, who would say that an important part of Black history is queer theory?
Now, who would say that? I can't think of anybody that would say that at all. He's right.
That is somebody pushing an agenda on our kids.
Yes, I agree. They're trying to make our lovely, perfectly white kids, perfectly white straight kids, they're trying to make them black gay kids. They're indoctrinating our white children into being black gay. Sorry.
So when you look to see they have stuff about intersectionality, abolishing prisons, that's a political agenda. And so that's the wrong side of the line for Florida standards. We believe in teaching kids facts and how to think, but we don't believe they should have an agenda imposed on them. When you try to use Black history to shoehorn in queer theory, you are clearly trying to use that for political purposes.
Right, because gay is political. To be queer is political. He makes a lot of really good points. But just for the sake of balance, let's listen to Bakari Sellers. He was on CNN last night with Aaron Burnett, who asked him this.
So, Bakari, what do you say to Governor DeSantis and his defense for blocking this course in Florida?
Well, I would say to Governor DeSantis, if he was in front of me, I would say that your blatant ignorance is showing. He asked the question, who would care about Black queer studies? I would say that the king of rock and roll, Little Richard, was a Black gay man. I would say that the architect of the March on Washington, Bayard Rustin, a Black gay man. I would say that one time, one of the greatest minds of our generation, of our lifetime, James Baldwin, he was once asked by a reporter about the challenges he faced in his career growing up Black, impoverished, and gay. And James Baldwin laughed and said, I hit the jackpot. And so the type of ignorance that he's doing is nothing more than a political ploy. In my heart, Aaron, it infuriates me because I have to defend my Blackness. I have to defend my Blackness to a very small man who ran great campaigns to be governor of Florida. I have to defend my Blackness and my being. And that frustrates me. And the audacity of someone like Governor DeSantis to come out and tell me what my history is and what can be taught to my children, I believe is wholly unacceptable. But this is where we are. And these culture wars are where we are in American politics.
Well said by Bakari Sellers. Here is Kurt Eichenwald on Twitter. He writes, DeSantis says AP African American Studies was banned because it contains queer theory. Reality, what he's talking about is that it includes reading Nobel Prize winner Toni Morrison, one of the greatest black writers in history. Number two, kids aren't being denied this course. It's being offered to seniors in high school. The majority of high school seniors at graduation are adults, 18 years. My daughter's a senior in high school. She just turned 18. The rest of them, he says, are almost adults. This means that these adults will not have the opportunity when the class is no longer pilot program to earn advanced placement in college for those who want to study black history, arts, etc. It means they, depending on the college, they could lose out on a college credit. It means that if they want to major in black studies, they will be dumber when their classmates who come from states that have stronger interest in education rather than politics. And lastly, Kurt Eichenwald says, and it means that these adults are losing freedom, the freedom to get an advanced education on a topic they may want to dedicate their college studies to, all because they're from Florida. Tanya Durrick's national correspondent at NPR, who covers race, criminal justice, says, the censoring and banning of teaching black history are deeply connected to the attempts to censor and silence the existence and histories of gay and queer people. The same folks who spread the CRT panic spread the groomer panic. You might even call it intersectional. Well done. Another tweet. It always loops back to how much Republican officials hate LGBTQ people. My God, this guy thinks about gay people more than I do, and I'm gay. And finally, Sherilyn Ifill tweeted, now, who would say that queer theory is an impromptu part of black history or intersectionality? Anyone studying the work of Pauli Murray, whose legal theories and research influenced both Thurgood Marshall and Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She coined the phrase Jane Crow because intersectionality. So just a few reactions on that, which create what I think is the intellectual context and arguments that need to be made, because people like Ron DeSantis just cherry pick little pieces, little parts. They create a narrative, they scare people, and they keep winning that narrative. And we've got to do better and push back in as many ways as we can. All right, let's go from the homophobia and racism of Ron DeSantis to the patriarchy and anti-women point of view that you're hearing from this radio show host, or I don't know who's talking, but Congressman Jim Banks is the guy who gives the answer. But this is not a drill, folks. This is a real thing. This is the Christian nation they want to make, that if you're a young lady who's raped by her uncle, you can't go to another state where you can get an abortion because they don't allow them in yours.
Our work as a pro-life movement is far from over. If a young lady can hop in a car in Fort Wayne and in an hour and a half, she can be in a place in Michigan, or in just under 3 hours, she could cross the line into Illinois and achieve what she was able to do with abortion clinics here in Indiana, the fight is far from over.
That's exactly right. And I'm for federal legislation. I'm for stronger laws at the state levels, whatever we can do to save lives, to protect babies. That's what this fight is all about.
All right, there you go, Jim Banks. That's not a drill, folks. Not a drill. No, this is what they want to do. We should believe them when they say it. All right. Well, what else can I tell you? Barry Ritholtz coming up in just a moment, but probably worth mentioning that the FDA has now proposed offering Americans a single dose of COVID vaccine each fall, which makes things less complicated. The agency is suggesting an annual dose of an updated bivalent vaccine, much like the strategy long used to immunize against the flu. The proposal took some scientists by surprise, including a few of the FDA's own advisors, who said there's little research to necessarily support the suggested plan. The advisors are scheduled to meet on Thursday to discuss the country's vaccine strategy, so let's follow that one closely. And finally, federal agents have seized $24 million worth of cocaine off of a boat trying to reach Puerto Rico, apparently. Wow, this is good. Authorities arrested 2 people from the Dominican Republic and 1 from Colombia as they seized more than 2,200 pounds of cocaine Friday near the coastal town of Humacao, according to U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Apparently, it's the second large The second large drug seizure reported this month in the waters off Puerto Rico. The first one was at Don Jr.'s house. I'm just kidding. Everybody just talks about how much cocaine that he probably does. And that's the way. He's like the guy now. He's the punchline for the joke of cocaine, I think. That's got to be something to be proud of. All right, well, speaking of cocaine, Barry Ritholtz has probably never done any, right? He is really, really one of my all-time faves, one of your all-time faves. I don't really understand why everybody likes him so much, or maybe I do. He really is a pretty smart guy. And if you want to know, just ask him. Why am I really being a dick to my guest who I'm about to introduce? I could only do that with him. He's the co-chief investment officer of Ritholtz Wealth Management. He's the host of Masters in Business podcast on the Bloomberg Network. He's the author of Bailout Nation, and his blog is hugely popular in the world of finance. The Big Picture, his daily reads, I love those, and so much more. He's on Twitter at Ritholtz, Ritholtz.com. We talked about the debt ceiling, inflation, cars, even watches on today's conversation. I love talking to Barry Ritholtz. You love when I talk to Barry Ritholtz. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for Big Barry Ritholtz.
I had so much fun yesterday. Just an insane day in the city. It was a blast.
Why? What happened?
So I went in for a podcast, and I had COVID in November, and it was fairly mild because I'm vaxxed and boosted, and taking ivermectin really helped speed up the recovery.
Oh, I didn't know. How did you get your hands on some of that?
Through the horse farm we own.
Right.
So the thing I didn't know when I learned about it is that you had to take it, as a suppository, which was a little uncomfortable. Yeah. Because, humans and horses, very different size behinds. Cleared it right up. And so anyway, normally we're always 2 or 3 ahead. So if a guest cancels or I cancel a show, we're fine. But I missed in the 2 weeks I was out on Tuesday was the first day. And then so I canceled that. Then the next week, and then by the time I was no longer testing positive, it was 2 weeks, 3 shows, and suddenly, hey, we better get some shows in the can, or we're going to be running repeats. And so I've been trying to double up and have a little bit of a buffer the past few weeks, and booked something last minute for Wednesday. Went in, and I just it was like one of those crazy days in the city where you just meet all these really cool people. So I go in to do an interview with Neil Dutta of Renaissance Macro, who's an interesting young guy who used to work with a friend of mine. It's just like a weird small world. I didn't know you and Rosie worked together. And then I bump into Howard Marks, who's a very well-known bond investor. And then I bump into Sonali Basak, who's a young woman who's a reporter for Bloomberg. Oh, and then I set up just a quick hi, how are you with Charity Dean. And it turns out I introduced her to Mike Bloomberg, and it turns out Charity Dean, who's the protagonist in the Michael Lewis book, The Premonition, her mom went to high school with Michael Bloomberg. It was what? Just crazy, endless, crazy stuff.
There's so many names on the floor. I don't know where to walk.
It was, dude, I'm giving you half of them. I'm not even telling you. It was just bonkers.
Was George Santos there?
No, he's up. Isn't he in the space station? Isn't he circling the Earth now? I thought he was.
Yes, that's right. He's on the space committee, and so that's because he was an astronaut. That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, you gotta love Senator Kelly trolling. That's how you troll people.
Oh, I didn't see that. Senator Kelly was actually an astronaut, trolled George Santos over being put on the space committee.
So great. Yeah, let me find that for you. It was so good. It was professional grade trolling. It's that's how you do it. Here it is. Wow, look at that. Awesome, says Senator Kelly. Awesome to have former NASA astronaut and moonwalker, Representative George Santos, on the House Science, Space, and Technology Committee. To infinity and beyond. It's just, he's a pro.
Good for him, Mark Kelly. He seems like such a deadly serious guy.
Well, it's serious business what he does. I just DM'd that to you.
All right.
Which reminds me, let me shut off all these other noisy things.
All right. Well, thank you for joining me, Barry Ritholtz.
My pleasure.
We've already gotten started, as always.
Talking about all sorts of stuff.
And I wanted to talk about several things with you, of course, that deal with the world that you live in, of money, finance.
My world. Yeah.
Economics. Why? What's going on with inflation? Inflation is down, and it's not because of the Fed. You've been writing and covering this. I think that's what you're saying. What are we looking at? Where are we in our curve?
So let me give you the quick summation so this makes sense to listeners. So for those of you who might need reminding, we had very low inflation for the past decade before the pandemic. Despite low rates, despite monetary stimulus, inflation stayed very subdued. Then we have the pandemic. We lock everybody in their houses for a year. All these people are out of work. And in order to make sure that people can eat and pay the rent and survive, we passed the first CARES Act, which is $2 trillion under President Trump. And then we passed passed on a bipartisan basis. Then the follow-up was CARES Act 2, which was just about the first one was $2 trillion. CARES Act 2 was also about $1 trillion. And then President Biden comes in and he passes CARES Act 3, also about $1 trillion. So you have a lot of money coursing through the system. Now, keep in mind, under normal circumstances, the United States is best described as a service-based economy. About 60% of our consumption, more than half, are services. Now, services are anything that's not a physical good. So you go to the movies, you stay in a hotel, you take an airplane flight, you go to dinner, you do all these things. Those are services. You get tax help, you get legal assistance, you get, all these different things, medical care, teaching. These are services. Suddenly everybody's stuck at home. You can't go out to the theater or the movies. Right. You can't go to restaurants. You're not traveling. You're not going on vacation. The kids aren't going to school. Our services-based economy suddenly becomes a good-based economy where, well, we can't go to the movies, but let's order a new TV. Let's build an extension to the house. Let's add a pool. Let's convert the garage. So suddenly there's this massive surge in demand for goods, more than normal, which usually would lead to some inflation. But then you have all these other problems crop up. So we've underbuilt houses for a decade following the financial crisis. Immigration, legal immigration, has fallen over the past 2 decades. It wasn't just Trump. The drop predated him. He made it worse. And surprisingly, Biden hasn't reversed many of his policies in this space. You have a lot of early retirements, a lot of disability. 500,000 people who died from COVID are now no longer in the labor pool. It's over 1 million deaths, but 30-40% of them were workers. Long COVID, depending on whose estimate you want to look at, 10, 15 million people are either out of the labor pool or working part-time because they're medically
that seems
challenged.
Like a hard thing to measure, but yeah.
Yeah, no, but these are just the estimates. So suddenly we have a massive shortfall of laborers. So you don't have enough houses, prices go up. You don't have enough apartment buildings because the people who can no longer afford houses become to buy, now they're renters. Those prices go up. There aren't enough workers. Wages go up. Semiconductors are really problematic. It's not like flicking a switch. Here it is 1.5 years later since we reopened, and we still are way behind where we should be. So car prices are up and technology prices are up. So all these things are elevated in price. And we discover our supply chain is very fragile. Just-in-time inventory is not robust. Wait, if there's any interruption, we don't have shit to sell? What's that about? So all these factors lead to what should be a temporary increase in prices that should go away once things normalize. And we see lots of signs of that. Energy prices have come down. Lumber prices have come down. In fact, for 2022, gas and oil prices actually were cheaper at the end of 2022 than they were at the beginning of 2022. Now, you might not have known that if you're watching Fox News, but it's just a fact. Pull up a chart on oil prices, a chart on gasoline prices, they all came down from their peak.
Sure.
And ended the year negative. So when we look at copper, even used car prices have started to come down.
Yeah, I heard like a fair bit. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you go out into the luxury segment, things like used high-end watches have become cheaper. They were a bubble unto themselves.
Is that a market that you spend a lot of time following? Used high-end watches? Timepieces?
Listen, I track a million different data sources, and when the high-end luxury consumer is pulling back, that's a warning sign. You want to pay attention to that.
That's interesting. So, okay, you see all these things now happening, the car prices, the watches, and we're starting to see what?
So it's pretty clear inflation is not the problem we thought it was a year ago. It's obviously maybe Team Transitory turned out to be right after all, just took longer than everybody expected. But we have a Federal Reserve that seems hell-bent on raising rates regardless of the damage it caused. My friend Claudia Sahm, who's a former Fed researcher who hosts Stay at Home Macro is the name of her research Substack. She was quoted in this New York Times piece pointing out, hey, how come so much of the inflation fighting pain and damage falls on the bottom half of the economy? Wealthy people buy houses for cash. They don't need a mortgage. But when mortgage rates double, it's going to really hurt the people who are at the bottom half of the economic strata. Keep in mind, during the 2010s, when rates were really low, stocks went way up, bonds went way up, real estate went up way up. So you end up with low rates really benefiting the wealthy, but not really having that big of an impact on the bottom half, because a lot of people still had credit issues from the financial crisis and could not take advantage of those low rates. So, damned if you do, damned if you don't. Now rates go higher and it's hurting the bottom half, and it doesn't, I don't think the top half is affected as much as the bottom half is. But, that's why you pay attention to things like the price of used Rolexes are down 27%.
Right.
Was this a bubble, or are people starting to get concerned about a recession and are throttling back their spending? P.S. I love buying shit during recessions. I love getting value for my money. I hate to spend top dollar on anything. And you've seen the junk I've collected. Everything I own is been, including this dumb thing. Oh, well, this is a Seiko, so it's $169. But my expensive watch I got from a mortgage broker who was liquidating his holdings during the financial crisis. That you have to sometimes, be opportunistic when everybody is panicking and selling. I would rather be a buyer.
And you're not alone in that, and that probably matters.
But yeah, it's when, when you're chasing the dragon, you really have to be aware of everybody in the crowd is all doing the same things.
Yeah.
So
when do you wear that expensive watch?
It depends on my mood. By the way, it's hard to beat. Look at this watch. It's beautiful.
I guess. I mean, it's a podcast. Most people probably won't see it. But now I'll just put that clip out.
It's a Seiko dive watch, and I want to say I paid $169 for it. It's a brick shit house. It's real. They make great products. Listen, Rolex makes a beautiful product, and if you're in the market for a $10,000 or a $20,000 watch, that's a really nice watch. But Seiko, bang for the buck. Listen, there's very fine dining, and there's cheap and cheerful, and there's a place for both of them.
The idea of spending a lot of money on a watch to me is flabbergasting. But get back to the conclusion of I know, but listen, get back to the
if you're a watch geek,
okay.
Listen, there are things people spend
I think watches are
money on that I'm shocked about.
I can appreciate the craftsmanship of anything from a watch to a gun to a fighter jet to a tower. Doesn't mean I think that we should be building and buying them. But here's the thing:
if you want to build $25,000 watches and sell them to people who want to pay $25,000 watches, knock yourself out. There's a market for everybody.
What society do we want to be in where people have an extra $25,000 for a watch?
Oh, by the way, You should go to some of the watch sites and look at the prices of some of the expensive watches.
I'm sure, but that's
you could spend $500,000.
That kind of stuff makes me nauseous. Listen, don't start with me. I'm reading Thoreau. Now, listen, let's move on to inflationary pressures and who caused them, who done it. What is the Fed? The Fed did it right. You guys were all critical, but they nailed it. They fucking nailed it right in sweet spot.
Not really.
And then he got COVID, Powell.
Yeah. I don't think the Fed nailed it because they set a 2% inflation target for the past 15 years, and inflation has been way below that, certainly for the past 10 years. And as of March 2021, inflation ticked right through 2% and kept going. So it went 2%, 3%, 4%, 5%, 6%. The Fed pretty much didn't do anything. And then, suddenly they realized a year later, after it had passed its 2% target, and in March 2022, a year after it went through its 2% target, the Fed, late to the party, kind of panicked. Now, there's a big argument to be made. They shouldn't have been at zero this whole time. Certainly, the pandemic gave them reason to think about cutting rates, but they took rates to zero. And after it was pretty clear in a number of quarters that, hey, between the fiscal stimulus and everything else, the emergency isn't here anymore. We have a vaccine coming in 2020, we said, and the market recovered from the lows in March of 2020. The stock market ran up 68%. That's a crazy number, which the Fed should have said, hey, there's a lot of money around. There's inflation around. Right. Maybe we should think about, at the very least, getting off of our emergency footing and start to normalize rates. So they were late to recognize inflation. Now I think they're late to recognize that inflation peaked 6-8 months ago. Inflation peaked in June. And wherever I look, inflation is coming down. To keep raising rates, cause a recession, throw people out of work, increase the unemployment rate, that is unnecessary pain to inflict, partly because I think Jerome Powell, the Federal Reserve Chairman, is in a pissing match with Wall Street. Wall Street saying, hey, you're going to cause a recession and you're going to start cutting. And we see rates lower at the end of 2023. And the Fed chairman is saying, no, I'm not seeing that because I want to take rates to 5.25, and I don't care what the data says. And I have a little bit of a problem with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the point, what you're saying there is it's not over. I'm acting like it's that raising interest rates is something that they're done doing.
Well, I think they should be done doing it. They think there's a whole lot more to go. And since they control rates and I don't, I could just say, hey, you're causing people some real discomfort.
Well, let's talk.
Are you sure you want to do that?
Let's talk then, unless there's anything else to talk about in terms of where inflation is at and the Fed's role in it. I would like to talk to you about this. I really wish we didn't have to talk about it. We've talked about it several times, certainly back in 2011. The debt ceiling, we're there. I'm sure you're enraged.
Do we really have to talk about this?
I mean, you've got it done. You've got the rent. Do you think that it is going to get to the point where it does real damage to the economy?
Historically,
or that they, the political analysis with that they somehow get, they get concessions that certainly would be bad for a huge percentage of Americans, like, something on Social Security or Medicare or something as a bargaining chip. Do you think anybody's going to get hurt over this?
So first of all, we can't talk about the debt ceiling without talking about the nonsense involved in the debt ceiling, right? So why do we not want to raise the debt ceiling? Oh, we're so concerned about the deficit. We're concerned about this. Well, let me point out that when Trump was president and the Republicans had the House and the Senate for part of his presidency, they approved a ton of spending, not just the spending during COVID, but the 2017 tax and jobs giant tax cut, which ultimately the Trump presidency is responsible for 25% of the total outstanding federal debt in America. And it's pretty obvious, and I've said this before on your show, don't take it seriously. Don't take people seriously who only discover the deficit as an evil when their party doesn't control the White House.
Yeah. Well,
look, if you want to make an argument that deficits are a problem, to me, you have to apply it consistently. You don't get to apply. You don't get to say, "Oh, deficits." You don't get to deficit spend, cut taxes, deficit, increase spending, and revel in the economic boom that gives you, only to become the disloyal opposition and say, no, we don't want a deficit spend because it's actually good for the economy.
Yeah, well,
and we don't want you to get reelected. So let's fuck the country's economy, and hopefully you get blamed. I think you got to call it out as that. I've been hearing my entire adult life the dangers of deficit spending, and everything that's been threatened at what would happen if we deficit spend, not a single thing has come true. The collapse of the dollar. No one will lend to America anymore. It'll cost the country so much to borrow. None of the things happen.
Time to stop.
And so
you wrote this back in 2021. Time to stop believing deficit bullshit. I mean, you reshared it because it's, people haven't stopped believing in deficit bullshit, but this is a really good piece.
Yeah, because it's one of those things that it just, I think it was Jonathan Chait. Somebody said, how do people, the GOP has been toggling back and forth between deficit spend.
I'll read the quote that you included in your piece. Jonathan Chait at New York Magazine says, when Republicans last held the presidency, they happily slashed taxes, jacked up spending, and enjoyed the proceeds of a roaring economy. When they lost the presidency, they decided the budget deficit posed an existential threat. They've been toggling between those two extreme positions for 4 decades now, and many people still haven't quite picked up on the pattern.
Really, it's so true. I think that at a certain point, people have to recognize that it's nonsense, and yet it seems like a big swath of the country just doesn't get it. It's look. I know misinformation is a thing. I get that.
I think it's just that most people have strong feelings on debt and deficits and moral thoughts and beliefs about owing money, and they think then they extend those beliefs that they have about their personal finances to the nation, or their business finances to the nation's finances. And it's just a misunderstanding of how economics work, especially when you're the guy printing the money.
Somebody showed this book from, I want to say it was like 1931, that drew the comparison between a family household and their finances and the government deficit spending. When you just have to think about it for 30 seconds and you realize how completely ridiculous that metaphor is. I don't have a printing press in my basement that allows me to create new money. I don't have essentially infinite full faith and credit behind the debts I incur. It's any household obviously or a state for that matter has a very different set of economic rules that they live under than the government does. So it's amazing that something that has a superficial level of persuasiveness but fails any close scrutiny, how effective that is at convincing, I don't even want to say dumb people who should know better but don't, as to how absurd these circumstances are.
The other lack of, certainly something that's fairly simple to understand is how government spending kind of works and how taxation works. And a lot of people also don't understand that if you cut taxes without cutting spending, which is what Republicans always do, the whole two Santas theory, then you create a budget deficit. But they'll argue, we're cutting those taxes, and then those people have more money, and they're spending more money. It creates more jobs, and it's like, and then more people are paying taxes, and that makes up the gap, which is not a thing. It's just not. It's been tried everywhere, as we've talked about in the past. But that's also a convincing argument that obviously gets made, and they just deny the fact that Trump's tax cuts created a deficit. They don't admit
it's called unfunded tax cuts, and either you're going to offset the taxes with equivalent spending cuts, or your deficit spending. There's no ambiguity here. If I want to, and in fact, we have rules in place that say if you want to increase spending here, you have to cut spending there in order to manage the deficit spending. I'm kind of fascinated by the theory floated by Lawrence Tribe that says, hey, listen, when Congress, according to the Constitution, Congress is the body that authorizes spending on behalf of the nation. When Congress said, hey, here's what we're going to spend this on, who cares about the debt ceiling? That money is already spent. You can ignore the debt ceiling because essentially Congress has said, we're going to spend $100 on all this good stuff for everybody. By the way, the debt ceiling is $92. Figure it out. It's like, okay, we're listening to Congress. We're spending the $100. It's sort of a weird conflict. And Lawrence Tribe said, hey, they've already spent that. Yeah. The fact that they subsequently come back and said, we're not approving the debt ceiling. Well, it's up to them to reconcile it. They can't tell you blue and yellow and you have to figure out green. You said $100 and $92. You idiots figure it out.
Okay, this is a free-for-all for now. I mean, those are the two big subjects that I wanted to talk about. And I've been reading all your stuff lately, all your tweets, but I was like, there's a few different ways I want to go with you. I know I wanted to just ask you a general EV question. Just read a really interesting David Wallace Wells column in New York Times about how everybody's been wrong about the EV industry, and it's pretty interesting. You're always following that, cars in general, obviously. I saw you tweeting about the Corvette, the new electric Corvette. My dad's a Corvette hybrid Corvette. My dad's a Corvette guy. I asked him if he's gonna get it. I sent him your tweet. He probably doesn't know how to open Twitter. But what do you got?
By the way, 0 to 60 in 2.5 seconds. Yeah, all-wheel drive, and about $100,000, which is not nothing. But previously, if you wanted that sort of speed, that's supercar speed. If you wanted that sort of speed, you used to have to spend $1 million to get that.
Yeah, but you won't get that loud rev of the engine. You won't get that.
You still get that. Well, first of all, the new Corvette is a V6, not a V8. Well, is it? Let me see what this is.
Who cares? So let me ask you about the EV industry and specifically. You got anything on Tesla? Are you fascinated in any way? Are there parallels throughout human history where a CEO of a product that was a pretty popular thing really just tanked it? You've got people, Ritholtz, selling their Teslas over his antics and behavior and stuff. What do you want to say about EVs or Tesla or Elon Musk?
It's kind of, the whole thing is perplexing because here's a guy who, while certainly a successful entrepreneur who's had a number of wins, PayPal and SpaceX, it's not just like a one-off, seems to have no impulse control. And I wrote a post a couple of weeks ago saying, get yourself some no men, not to be sexist, but the phrase yes men comes from last century when and it's been around for millennia, when you have a successful, wealthy, accomplished person, they seem to be surrounded with these hangers-on who just indulge their worst impulses. Oh, that's brilliant, Elon. Oh, do more of that, Elon. At least the remora fish at least cleans the parasites off of it. So simply just hang around, and you need someone to say around you, and I have that with some of my own colleagues, will say, hey, Pete, that's a really fucking dumb idea. What are you doing? No, don't buy Twitter. That's really stupid. It's $44 billion is way too much money. Oh, you already signed a no due diligence contract to buy it for is there a breakup fee? It's $1 billion. Pay the $1 billion and walk away.
It sounds exactly like I've been in your office many times. It's a real put down factory.
But meanwhile, here's a guy who seems to have forgotten. And by the way, my colleague Invictus is the person who started this research and said, let's cross-reference the voting records by county with the Tesla registrations. And lo and behold, it turns out that counties with high education, high income that voted for Biden over Trump is where your highest amount of Tesla registrations were.
That right.
And so and Paul Krugman has subsequently wrote about this, and the Washington Post kind of wrote about it. But essentially you have Elon Musk going on Twitter and retweeting these right-wing memes and alienating what seems to be a huge swath of their existing clients and potential buyers, to the point where Tesla just cut prices for the first time in their history from $8,000 to $20,000 per car. It's completely wild. You got to wonder. P.S. Elon Musk is the first person in history to personally, I don't mean his corporation, to personally lose $200 billion. His net worth went down $200 billion. The CEO of LVMH, a luxury brand maker that has all these different companies, is now the wealthiest person in the world. Elon Musk is, don't crocodile tears. He's number 2, but yeah, man. And to be fair, a lot of the value of Tesla was artificial. It ran up in anticipation of being added to the S&P 500 index, which is a big thing. It never should have been worth more than every other car company combined. In order for that to be, rational, Tesla would have to have ended up with like an 87% market share. No one has more than a 15% market share. It just would never happen. And so today we see all the competitive legacy automakers putting out some pretty good product. You have Ford with the Mach-E Mustang and the F-150 Lightning. I had one for a week, and they're really stepping it up. And you have Volkswagen and Audi and Porsche. It's the same company. Volkswagen has a ton of new EVs, as does Audi. It's called the e-tron. The line of Audi has like 6 different cars. The Porsche Taycan is this like
you haven't even mentioned the more affordable ones, of course, like Hyundai Kia and Hyundai. And Kia's new logo, which is so
Hyundai
cool.
EV6 is supposed to be great.
But the point, the only thing I was going to say is it just does seem like there's like an apex of Elon Musk's assholery and the rest of the manufacturers catching up around the same year-ish.
So Tesla has had a decade head start on everybody else. Their over-the-air software updates are better than everybody else's. Their self-driving unit at one point in time was way ahead of everybody. If you see my buddy Doug DeMuro's YouTube's videos, he says there are other people who caught up and passed Tesla. The self-driving is as good or better than Tesla's. Their software, their interface, they still have a lead, but it's not a decade anymore. Maybe it's an 18 to 30 month lead, and everybody else is pouring billions and billions of dollars into this. They're catching up. So not that Tesla's going away. Tesla is likely to be a important EV maker for the considerable future. Keep in mind, their product lineup is old, kind of dated. They haven't really updated their look in a while. You look at the auto industry, it's a constant series of changes. So I think Tesla is got its work cut out for them. And listen, full credit to Elon Musk for dragging the entire legacy automobile manufacturers into the electric.
I will never give full credit to that man for anything.
So I'll give a little
team
credit
of people
to Jeff Bezos for this also, because I think the legacy automakers looked over and said, Jesus Christ, Amazon just steamrolled a dozen industries and fucking mangled them. And now Musk wants to do the same thing to us. Let's get our shit together. Yeah. So 90% Musk, 10% Bezos.
All right, but there's people behind them. But I take your point, his influence and
no doubt about it. But right in this period when all this competition is coming online and their product line is getting kind of old, and the legacy automakers have some, look at the new products from Mercedes.
Amazing. They're all
Lucid, Rivian, go down the list.
Yep.
And it seems that Musk is distracted dicking around with Twitter. I mean, if I'm a Twitter shareholder, I'm not happy. P.S. Because we own big indexes, all our clients own Twitter. And so I think it's a bad look for me to bet against Twitter. I mean, to bet against Tesla because clients own it. But I said to a buddy, I could show you the DMs. I'm like, dude, I can't short this. but you absolutely should sell this. This thing's going to get cut in half. And it just keeps going. And
you can't because you're.
I can. To me, it's
it would look look. Bad for you to be saying.
If I give somebody my money and they put it to work managing it on my behalf, and then I find out afterwards that, wait, I'm long X, Y, and Z, and you're betting against Z? What the hell?
Right.
So I don't want to short Tesla because I think it's inappropriate, and I would be unhappy, and my clients would be unhappy. So I didn't do that. But a friend who was thinking about it, I'm like, dude, I would do it in a heartbeat if I thought it was not inappropriate for me to do. And, that was months and months ago, and the thing just has collapsed. So chalk it up to missed opportunity.
Has it bounced back? I stopped following it.
Yeah, it was up like 10% one day. Let's take a quick look at what Twitter is like. Can I share my screen with you?
No. Because we're doing a podcast, so who?
Yeah, I understand that, but you could do a screen grab if you.
I suppose I could. You could send me the image, and I could toss it in there.
All right. So where are we? If I look at year to date today, on a percentage basis, we're up 3%. Let's go a little more than that. Off of the lows, which were look at that, January 3rd. Way to start it out. Let's see if one day it bounced like 10% in a day.
Yeah, it was fun.
Oh, yeah. Look at this. From January 3rd to January 13th. So for those 10 days, Jesus, that's some recovery. It's up 13% in that short period. Oh, more than that, 14.3%. If you were a buyer on January 3rd and a seller on January 4th and a seller on January, let's call it 11th, 12th, what is that? 11th, you made 14%. That's a pretty good return. On the other hand, if you were a buyer on January 1st, 2022, right, January 3rd, when the market's open, you're down 69%, and that sucks. So,
but you get this
by the way,
time.
Other stocks have bounced. If you could look at other stocks like Netflix, they've bounced, but I think Tesla is its own monstrosity.
Yeah, but there's different. But the reasons are different, and they matter a lot.
For sure, absolutely. Year to date,
like the Netflix CEO didn't take his dick out and walk down Broadway.
Are you sure?
I mean, he might have.
Because the stock's up 73%.
Oh, well, then he must have. That's the only way to do it.
I mean, considering how badly tech stocks got mangled last year, plus 73% is pretty impressive going back to the lows in October.
Well, they keep pumping out that sweet, sweet content over there at the Netflix.
We've been watching. We just finished Kaleidoscope yesterday.
Oh,
really?
I love
really
how much you watch with your wife. I'm always impressed with that.
We have a show. There's always one show that we're watching,
and then you get your own shows.
Right. So a couple of times a week
I'm one of those people that is always way behind on whatever the hot show was. Almost everything.
So am I.
And
I haven't watched.
I'm watching White Lotus, and I want to talk with everybody about it, but nobody ever thinks, what are you talking about? We're already on to Wednesday.
Season 2. I watched season 1 of White Lotus. I haven't gotten motivated to watch season 2.
Yeah, we just started season 2, Val and I. Yeah. And it's in Sicily where
there are a bunch of shows where you just don't like any of the characters. Like, I know people love Billions. Everybody on the show is an asshole. Why do I need to spend an hour a night watching a family of 9 assholes each figure out ways to stab each other in the back?
I've never seen that show. Even the
people
episode.
Love it. Succession is another one.
Yeah, I've watched that. I watched a bunch of that. Now that
everybody's an asshole.
Well, that's true. Everybody is.
Right. I mean, that was the first one we watched, and I'm like, I don't like any of these people. I don't care about them. Why do I want to watch this show? Well, this is the Murdoch family. I don't care. I don't like the Murdochs either. So I want to watch people that inform, entertain, and intrigue me, not make me shake my head and say, man, these people are handed everything. What a bunch of stupid assholes.
I want, before you go, anything else before you go? Any other topics? Any other things? Anything that you've learned? You're learning new things every day about behavior, about sociology, philosophy, about markets, economics, finance.
Yeah, let me share an interesting thought that I
ladies and gentlemen, Ritholtz,
grudgingly
closing thought.
I used to think that we could fight back against misinformation, and instead, I've kind of come to the realization that it's such an insidious issue that you can't convince people of things they don't want to believe, whether it's true or not. And so what you have to do is simply maintain your own, I love this phrase, information hygiene, so that you're not succumbing to misinformation. And it's a little bit of a disappointment to reach that conclusion that, hey, man, that's just the way it is. Bullshit has always been here. It always will. People believe what they want to. We seek out things that agree with us. We look for the things that will confirm our prior biases. And nobody wants to be told, look for disconfirming information on the chance that you're wrong. That's not how humans operate. Evolution and social creatures combine to make us uniquely vulnerable to people who don't have our best interests at heart and are very happy to manipulate us, whether it's through algorithms on social media, manufacturing outrage on cable news. Like it's funny. I started my career on a trading desk, and I generally not a particularly self-aware person, kind of walking through life obliviously lost in my own little thought cloud. But one of the things you learn when you're on a desk is you have to be very sensitive to your own sense of panic. When you feel that panic rising, you have to recognize it for what it is, put it in a box, and operate without it. You can't succumb to emotion. You have to stay rational. And so that small bit of self-awareness, not only is it what sent me down the rabbit hole of behavioral finance, but it still is with me. Like, I notice certain things when I'm going down when I'm doom scrolling on Twitter and I'm thinking to myself, I would like to kill that person. I'm very self-aware that son of a bitch, that algorithm, like when you get angry and start grinding your teeth, the algorithm is manipulating you. So when I get into that, when I smell the early stages of that murderous rage, P.S., you have a guy who loses an election going around shooting up people's houses because he doesn't recognize that, and he's completely given into the algorithm. He's given into the bullshit manufactured outrage from cable news. This has, and clearly not especially smart or stable, because millions of people are manipulated this way. Very few run around shooting up houses.
But too many do.
Yes. Or attacking the Capitol. That's the same, the ability to whip up a crowd, whip up a frenzy, right? You and I have talked about this before. My father used to say to me, don't think it can't happen here. The Germans aren't unique. The Germans aren't special. I mean, an unusual set of circumstances led them to kill somewhere between 10 and 20 million people outside of the combat. I mean, just murder them in camps and elsewhere. But think of them less as Germans, as more as people. People do this, and those people did it. Why would you imagine the people here can't do it? It's
So when you say, though, that you're consigned to the fact, you've conceded that disinformation is really hard to beat back, and you have to have what you're referring to as your own kind of information hygiene.
You have to be in charge of your own information. So I have found, in terms of the productive use of my time, I find I am more effective trying to convince people, especially in the world of finance, where, hey, when you're wrong, you lose a fuck ton of money. So don't let these algos and these bullshit manufactured outrage affect the way. And the example I use all the time, hey, when Bush was president, pre-financial crisis, markets practically doubled, and my Democratic friends missed that. And then when Obama was president, markets went up, 200%. And my Republican friends missed that.
So markets also crater after 9/11 when Bush was president. Go ahead.
Right. And then they cratered at the other end of it. They cratered after the financial crisis. Yeah. So Obama came in, right near, 2 months before the low. So good timing. But if you ignore that and say, I'm not going to buy because he's a socialist Kenyan Muslim, you're going to leave a shit ton of money on the table. And so I have found that I'm not going to it's so much time, energy, and effort to convince a vax denier. Like we had family over the other day and over the summer the other day. And my cousin, who is married to an emergency room doctor, was talking about vaccinations and skeptically. And I was like, listen, your husband's a doctor. When people come into the emergency room and they're cut open and bleeding and they want to be saved, shouldn't they be confident that the nurses aren't going to give them fucking COVID because they're vaccinated? Or don't you want to tilt all those odds in your face? Nothing is a guarantee. It's always about, we have imperfect information. We don't know about the future. We're making our best probabilistic assessments. Don't you want to tilt the odds in your favor? And by the way, if you don't believe in vaccines, that's fine. Don't be in healthcare. How could you say, I don't know if I believe in vaccines, and I'm not really so sure about penicillin either. Maybe this is the wrong field for you. I think that's not a ridiculous conversation. And by the way, I've had the conversation with people in my industry about healthcare. And one of the things I said is, I like to say is, the parallels between healthcare and finance are, you're always dealing with unknowns. You're always dealing with, hey, this information is imperfect and ambiguous. And the future course of this disease, this treatment, this market, this investment is unknown. So, and the future itself is unknown. So we're stuck making the best judgment from a probabilistic perspective with imperfect information about an unknowable future. Doesn't that seem like that describes both of those things? So if you can't apply that rational approach to healthcare, maybe finance isn't the right field for you. I literally had this discussion at a conference a year ago when 10% of the speakers tapped out and didn't show up because there was a vaccine mandate. That's like, hey, if you don't get the basic math of this, like if 1 million dead and 15 million with long COVID versus a handful of people who may have had an adverse reaction to the vaccines, you have to be able to understand the difference between 12 and a million, right? You get that. And P.S., check out Justin Fox's new column about young people have been dropping dead on a more frequent basis. That if you look at the data, it predates COVID. It's got nothing to do with the vaccines. And fuck the people who are blaming the guy who had a heart attack after getting hit by a locomotive in the chest and his heart stopped.
Oh, no. Now it's so easy to apply to any death that was, I mean, like, did you hear about Ritholtz? What happened? He died. Well, what happened? He fucking got his head cut off. COVID.
Right.
No,
vaccine. It was the vaccine.
It was a vaccine.
Right. Because he was beheaded. Vaccine.
No, he's beheaded. No, it's probably the vaccine. Forget it.
My favorite group of assholes is he didn't die from COVID. He died with COVID. I don't understand. What are you saying? Well, COVID isn't what killed him. He just had COVID when he died. How do you explain he was perfectly healthy beforehand, and then he got this, and now what we have on our hands is a dead parrot. This is a parrot no more, had joined the choir eternal, if you remember the Monty Python routine. If nothing else, all other things being equal, if the guy with COVID is dying and the guy with COVID is not dying, why aren't we saying, well, he was old? But isn't that true? Isn't elderly have a comorbidity? Isn't age a comorbidity for everything from diabetes to cancer to heart disease to blood pressure? Just saying he was old. The assholes in the Florida health department said, well, when you age adjust our mortality statistics, you could see we didn't do much worse than any other state. And it's like, hey, shit for brains. Your state is filled with old people. What you're really saying is you failed to protect your old people, and lots of them died because you suck. Don't age adjust it. How about we competency adjust your statistics? And it turns out you, as the Surgeon General of the state who doesn't believe in vaccines, you should have your medical license stripped away, and you should go get a job somewhere, in maybe fast food makes more sense for you. So I just get super frustrated. Yeah. And I've decided I'm not going to convince these people. I'm not going to send my blood pressure up. I don't have high blood pressure, but I'm not going to get it because of these idiots. And so rather than waste a lot of time and with you and with them, instead, I'm just going to say to the people who are smart enough to recognize this, hey, protect yourself from misinformation. Learn the signs of junk nonsense. If you find yourself getting angry watching TV, or if you find yourself, verging on a murderous rampage because you've been manipulated by an algorithm, be self-aware enough to say, hey, these people are really good at manipulating people to do their bidding. And instead, try not to lose money because you believe bullshit. Right. So, well said. I think that's great. Really important.
No, it's great advice. I mean, it's not like, we don't have a solution for this misinformation. We have to adapt to it. And what you're saying is exactly what we need to be doing to adapt to it, which is why
last quote that really sums up this new philosophy perfectly. There's a Robert Heinlein book called The Notebooks of Lazarus Long. I'm a sci-fi geek from way back when. And my favorite quote from the book is, never try and teach a pig to sing. It wastes your time and annoys the pig. And so really, if people want to watch Fox News and they want to believe stupid shit, and like I have a car buddy who's a full-blown crazy Trumper, and it's fun talking about cars with him. And whenever he brings up, politics, I'm like, dude, we have a car relationship. I don't want to get into this with you, because you really want to bring up Biden's 8 documents that were found by accident and turned over immediately. Do you really want to have that conversation? Because we're just going to come away from it with me thinking less of you. And so I don't want to do that. It's like, I don't want to live in a little, New York liberal bubble. So I really go out of my way to have relationships with all sorts of people, but I kind of create these I like silos where we could talk about cars and sports, I like that. Politics.
I like that you name the subject that your relationship is exclusively based on. Listen, you and I talk about food. We do not. There's no reason to bring up Nancy Pelosi when we're talking about potato salad recipes, which is what I imagine you talk about.
It's just a bad.
I like that. We have a blank relationship. There you go, folks. Take that technique from Ritholtz. Our relationship is based on and not politics. Now, moving on. Let's stick to this.
You don't talk religion, politics, or sex with people, because that's my solution. Whenever it comes up, it's like, hey, let's talk about religion, because let's talk about your sex life with your wife. As long as you're talking about things that really shouldn't be discussed in polite society, let's hit for the trifecta and not just this dumb thing. Let's do all 3 dumb things.
Let's go for it. All right, buddy. I thank you very much. This is so fun, as always, talking to you.
As always.
All right, there he goes, everybody. At Ritholtz, what did you think? What did you think of that conversation? I hope you liked it, and I always want to hear back from you, your feedback, who you like, who you don't, who you want to hear more of. Let me know. standupwithpete@gmail.com. Thank you to my intern, Odessa San, to my announcer, Pete Coe, to the great Jon Carroll for the music, and all of you who are paying for this podcast. Most importantly, I can't do it without you. It's a free show, but it costs a lot. A lot of resources go into it. I need your subscription if you haven't signed up. Do it now. Standupwithpete.com, patreon.com/Pete Dominic. That's all I've got for you today, but I will be here tomorrow, because tomorrow is a weekday, and that's when you can expect me to drop a new conversation or more. Generally speaking, there's 2 guests on the show. generally speaking. I'm going to shut up. I love you guys. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Goodbye.
More of us know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. We got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. We got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. So get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. And even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.